Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our program, Becoming Less Racist, Lighting the Way to Anti-Racism. I'm your host, Simran Jeet Singh, and I'm so delighted to be joined today by April Rain. She's the creator of the hashtag OscarsSoWhite, which many of you probably remember. And she's the founder of a new digital content studio that advances opportunities for people of color. It's called Ensemble, and it's with Overture Global, and we'll talk a little bit more about what she's doing and why it matters in a moment. But before we get there, I just want to give a word on the program. Our vision is to offer two things that we believe the world needs badly right now. First, we want to offer insight into what's actually going on with racism. What does it look like? How does it happen? And really, every episode, we try and take a particular aspect and walk through it. Our goal is to help us understand how racism affects people at a personal level and at a systemic level. And the impulse there comes from James Baldwin, who beautifully stated, "If I love you, I have to make you conscious of the things you don't see." The other thing we hope to do here is to receive guidance from our expert guests on how to move from just understanding racism into actually taking action. And this may come as wisdom on how to grapple with the racist ideas embedded within ourselves. It may come as guidance on actions we can take to address the racism all around us. At the end of the day, what we're really looking to do is turn our learnings into action. Because as Angela Davis said so profoundly, in a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. So that's the goal. It's a spiritual journey, it's a political journey, it's a collective journey. But what we're really hoping to do together is to push back against racism in all the forms we encounter it within our lives. So today, I'm really excited to introduce, to those of you who don't know her, April Rain. She's the creator of the OscarsSoWhite hashtag, and she's the founder of this new digital content studio called Ensemble, and it advances opportunities for people of color in front of and behind the camera. She's the vice president of content strategy, and I'm so excited to talk to her. She's huge on Twitter. If you don't follow her already, that's how I connected with her initially. So thank you, April. Thanks so much for being here. And how's everything going on your end? How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Everything is going relatively well. I actually experience some guilt sometimes because I have been very blessed and fortunate that my immediate family is still healthy. Our bills are still getting paid, and I know that that is not the case for so many people. So in the grand scheme of things, we're doing okay for now.
Yeah, it's good to hear, and it's also good to maintain the perspective. I'm with you um, on the guilt that comes with that privilege, especially in this moment. So I appreciate you. I want to start by asking you what I ask a lot of my guests, and that's around your first encounter of racism. Do you have a striking memory? Is there a moment in your life where someone was racist towards you, or you experienced discrimination, and it kind of lit up a light bulb in your head, I guess?
I do. I am 50 years old, and this happened when I was 10. So it's been 40 years, and it's still very top of mind. Summertime, we lived in a lovely, lower middle class community. We had a community pool. My parents both worked outside of the home full time. And so during the summers, it was up to, me and my brother to entertain ourselves very often while our parents were at work. And so my mother would allow us to go, my parents would allow us to go to the community pool. And I love water. There's something very grounding for me about being near water, especially the ocean. But if I can't get to the ocean, then it's a pool. And so I would go every single day and not wear sunscreen at all, which I know is horrible, but I was 10 and whatever. And so I would get very tanned and very dark skinned. My hair, because I had some chemicals in my hair and because of the chlorine from the pool, my hair would actually turn orange or very light orange. So here's this very dark skinned girl with orange hair, and I would be there every single day. And I remember that, it was whatever they call it, the rest time, like, every 10 minutes of every hour, they make you get out of the pool so they can do whatever it is that they do. And so we were sitting in the shade, just waiting to get back into the pool. And for some reason, unprovoked, a little white kid called me a fuzzy-haired F word, the gay slur, which that's just what he had. And, but it was clearly more race-based than it was with respect to sexual orientation, because I'm not an F word, but I did have fuzzy hair that day. And it has always stayed with me. It was unprovoked. We weren't in the middle of a conversation and he, needed to throw something at me. That's just what he called me as he was walking by. And when you hear stories like this, you always think, when you hear it, you always think, oh, well, if I had been there, I surely would have said X, Y, Z. But in that particular moment, I was so taken aback that there was nothing that I could say. It took me a while to even register what he had said and then try to figure out why, because again, we weren't interacting, we weren't fighting. It wasn't, it never would have been anything that I had deserved, but it wasn't even expected. And that has always stayed with me. Why would someone have that type of hate in their heart for no reason at all, just because I existed?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm thinking through it, and I have so many similar stories of those moments where it's unprovoked and you're kind of caught off guard and you don't respond. And so here's my question as a follow up. Um, how did you process that, right? So in the moment you didn't say anything. Did you walk away and an hour later start processing and wish you had said something? Or 40 years later, 20 years later, did that stick with you and you looked back and you're like, I wish I knew this when I was 10?
Yeah, I try to give myself some grace, because I was 10. So which means I was probably in the 5th or 6th grade, and I wouldn't expect any kid to have the wherewithal to be able to process something that quickly. I vaguely remember telling my mother, maybe that evening when she got home from work or something, or maybe it was the next day. And my mother, not unlike me, I definitely get it from her, was in full mama bear mode, protect the cubs, make things better for them. And so, she was on level, whatever, bazillion, what do you want to do? We can shut that whole pool down. How do you want to handle this? And I said, no, I just want to let you know it happened. And so, then she went through asking, did I recognize the kid? And, did I feel safe going back to the pool? And, and so we worked it through that way. So it was more of a safety issue than, and then we sort of had the conversation about race and racism, and and these were continuing things. My parents were both active in the civil rights movement, so we had those conversations about what it means to be a Black child in America, and I attempt to have those conversations with my children, especially my son, who is 20 and off on his own at college, and driving while Black is a thing. So we have conversations about what to do when, not if, you're pulled over, as much as we have conversations about, the classes that he's taking.
I appreciate that, and I'm thinking about, so often we think about people's experiences of racism as happening in one moment. And then we think about these big moments of activism as single separated moments, right? And so for you, for example, I asked you this question of what happened when you were a kid. And so you told me 10 years old, and then what you're most well known for is your work with the Oscar So White hashtag, right? That global movement that really got attention all over the world and for all communities. And so it could be so easy for us to kind of point and say like, oh, this thing happened to you, and then however for 30 years later this other thing happened to you, right? And I guess what I'm interested in knowing is what is the process look like for you, the journey into activism, right? You mentioned your parents were involved in the civil rights movement. You're talking now about conversations you have with your kids. But is there a sort of thread that connects your childhood into your activism and your work today?
Absolutely. So the 10-year-old incident was the first one I remember. The next one happened when I was probably 16. My dad was in the military. We moved around a lot. I went to 3 different high schools in 3 different states. The last high school, we moved there in March of my junior year. Okay, so I had like 3 months of my junior year and then my entire senior year. As many of your watchers and listeners know, if you're planning to go to college, you apply for college the fall of your senior year, okay? And so as part of that process, you have to get recommendations from your high school counselor and, write the personal statement and all the rest of that stuff. And back in those days when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was applying for college, everything was written. If you were lucky if you had a typewriter, but, the applications were thick and, you had to get a postmark by a certain date as opposed to submitting everything online now. So anyway, so I had been there for 2 months, March through May of my junior year, and then starting in the fall, starting in August or September, and this high school was in Georgia. I had to reach out to my counselor. Now, I always had good grades, never got in trouble. So I was, I think I was number 17 out of 536 students when we graduated. I was, 17th with respect to GPA or whatever it was. Had never been called to the office, that kind of thing. And so in the fall, when it was time for me to submit my college applications, I asked my counselor for a recommendation. And at that time, you could choose whether the recommendation would be private. So, I thought, well, there's no reason, there's no issue. So I just checked yes, meaning I could not then see the recommendation that she had written for me. And so she did it, and, and my applications went out. And now again, I had the grades, I had the scores, everything looked perfect for me to start getting into some of the best schools in the country. And I started getting rejection letter after rejection letter after rejection letter. And I could not understand why. And I had people working with me on my personal statement. There was just no reason why I wasn't getting into the schools that I had chosen. So eventually my mother, again, Mama Bear, somehow contacted an admissions officer at one of the schools to which I had applied and been denied. And that person said to her in some, I can't tell you what's in that recommendation, but you should get a lawyer. And so we found out, obviously I can't say for sure, but again, this woman who knew me for maybe 3 months and who had never really interacted with me and definitely never for anything negative, had written such a scathing review of me that it turned off admissions officers. And so I didn't get into my top choices for college. So that was incident number 2. And obviously that one has stayed with me as well because it affected the trajectory of my life. Had I been able to go to this school as opposed to that school, who knows? So anyway, I went off to college and had an interesting experience. I ended up at the University of Texas at Austin. No regrets, great education. They had a top 10 business school and a top 10 law school at that time. I knew I wanted to go to both. I knew that after moving around so much that I wanted to be in one place for 7 years, because I'm not sure that I'd been able to say that I'd ever done that, or really, at least not for a really long time. So undergrad and law school, 7 full years in one place was the goal. And because their schools were good, it ended up being a great choice for me. And then on campus, spring of 1990. So I skipped a grade, so I was a year younger than most of my colleagues. So I was 19. Spring of 1990, my junior year, a white fraternity had a 3-on-3 basketball tournament and fundraiser kind of thing, as they did all the time. Now, 1990 was the era of Michael Jordan, right? He was the biggest thing in sports, not just basketball. And what they had done is for the basketball tournament, they had t-shirts made. And so they had the body of Michael Jordan in the, the jump man pose, but they had the face of Sambo in 1990. So I was, I think, vice president of the Black Student Alliance on campus, and we had 3% Black students. So in a school of 50,000, we had, I think the number was 1,836 Black students. And so we almost knew all of each other. We kept a very close and tight-knit group. And so we mobilized. We moved into action. And so there's a picture on the Austin American Statesman, the local city paper there, with me leading a march to the fraternity house right off campus, literally across the street from campus, to demand some changes. And there were other issues too. At one point we had a sit-in, we had conversations with the vice president of student affairs. There was a hunger strike. And during all this, again, I'm a 19-year-old kid. I had my own apartment at that time, and we started getting death threats. So I had really big, hulking football players escorting me to and from my home because there was concern about my safety. I kept a suitcase in the trunk of my car for several weeks because there was concern that, maybe I wouldn't be able to go home on a particular day. And so I wanted to make sure I had what I needed with me for a couple of days at least, and of course I'm still trying to go to class, and I'm still trying to just be, a young woman on campus living her life. And so part of that was when my activism or advocacy started, speaking up on behalf of fellow Black students on campus. And then it just sort of continued. It's always been part of my DNA to attempt to help people less fortunate than me. And very often those, my attempts have been more race focused than another marginalized community.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those stories. I mean, on one hand, I can't imagine being in that position and having that situation, and on the other hand, it's almost like what's changed in the last what's changed in the last 30 years, right? What you described there, it's not just that it could happen today, it's that it does happen today, and a lot worse happens today. So it's I don't know, we often, when we think about racism and racist experiences, we try and distance ourselves and be like, that couldn't happen here, or that couldn't happen now. And I think it's important for us to recognize, like, yes, there's important progress, yes, there's activism, but there's also a lot of it stands still, and it doesn't go anywhere. It might go backwards, right? It's not a linear progression at all times. And let me ask you, as you've sort of continued on your journey, you weren't doing this as a full-time career, right? Like you had your, like, as you mentioned, you were still a student when you were doing this activism, and you've had your own professional journey. And that's true when you brought up the Oscars So White hashtag. And if I can ask you to talk a little bit about why you brought that forward, where it came from, and what, I mean, just at the genesis of it, like what you thought might come out of it. What were you trying to say and hoping people might hear?
So Oscar So White was not my first viral hashtag, and it wasn't my last. And hashtags come to fruition in two different ways. Sometimes they're organic. You're just out there and you're not expecting anything, you're not looking for anything, and it just happens. Something goes viral, and then you decide what you want to do with it. And other times they are intentional. So these are the goals. This is the message I'm trying to get out there. This is what I'm trying to communicate with folks. Oscar So White was the former. I was, as you mentioned, still a full-time practicing attorney. I was practicing campaign finance law, so I had no nexus to the entertainment industry whatsoever. I was getting ready for work and watching the Oscar nominations because the Oscars were like my Super Bowl. And that particular year, 2015, January 2015, when the nominations were being read on one of the morning shows, there were no people of color nominated in any of the acting categories. That's 20 slots: Best Actor and Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor and Best Supporting Actress. And this was the year that gave us Selma, that gave us Beyond the Lights, and gave us Dear White People, which is now, a popular TV series, and a few other films. So there were definitely talent out there, but people were snubbed or overlooked, or whatever words you want to use. And so I just picked up my phone, which is typically embedded in my forearm, jumped on Twitter and said, "Oscar so white, they asked to touch my hair." And that was it. I was being snarky and sarcastic. I was also late for work. So I went on to work. I checked in on Twitter around lunchtime, and the hashtag was trending around the world based on that one tweet. And I was being snarky and sarcastic, and so the responses and the uses of the hashtag were equally so. So it was, things like "Oscar so white, they wear Birkenstocks in the wintertime." "Oscar so white, they think mayonnaise is too spicy." Issues like, things like that. And so it wasn't until a couple of days later when the conversation sort of shifted to an actual conversation about representation and diversity and inclusion with respect to the Oscars initially. And then over the years, the conversation has broadened to the entire entertainment industry. And in fact, so I didn't have any goals, and then it's like, well, you've got this viral hashtag. What do you want to do? Do you want to be, do you want this to be a moment and then you just move on, or is there something here? And if so, do you want to be the face of it? And so we started having those conversations. And in fact, I had to very quickly educate myself because, again, I was just being snarky. It's like, well, how white are the Oscars? And it's like, once I started the research, it's like, oh, like copy paper white, like, like, Yeti in the middle of a, winter storm white. And so then, we had deeper conversations on Twitter. But it wasn't until a year later, 2016, when yet again, for the second time in a row, there were no people of color nominated for any of the acting categories, that Oscar So White really took off. And I think part of that was people thinking, oh, well, one time is a fluke, but two times is a pattern. So maybe we need to listen to, what this crazy lady is talking about and see if she actually, if there's a there. And in fact, there was. And in 2016, year 2 of Oscar So White, the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences, the folks who run the Oscars, undertook several initiatives to increase the diversity among their ranks, among them doubling the number of people of color, and committing to doubling the number of people of color and doubling the number of women within their membership ranks by 2020, by this year.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think part of what I didn't know about the story was what that initial tweet looked like. I guess I never kind of did the groundwork of going back to see where it started. I guess for me, what's interesting and what I'd like to hear from you about is, on the one hand, you're saying you hadn't done the research. You didn't know the numbers for every year of how many people of color were included in the Oscar nominations. But something that morning as you were watching the shows and watching the nominations, something triggered you, and you noticed that all the actors and actresses who were nominated were white. And so I'm interested to know, what is that experience? What was it about your own psychology that made you notice, that makes a lot of America not notice? What made you speak up? It seems like you had a sense that there was a there before you did the research and before everyone else jumped on the bandwagon.
You're very kind. And I would like to tell a more informed story. I'm not sure what it was. What I will say is that in January 2015, I had been on Twitter for almost 5 years. I started in 2010. And I have learned so much from people who are clearly much smarter than me and much more knowledgeable than me on Twitter than I ever did in college or law school. And so I think that part of part of what triggered in me that day is just um, taking in some of the learning that I had done in the, in those years. I mean, unlearning racism, becoming anti-racist, just becoming an adult, a full-fledged compassionate human is a lifelong journey. And so there isn't anything particular that I can say, that it struck me that particular day because, this wasn't the first time. And as I mentioned, not the last time that no people of color were nominated in any of those categories. And so I can't tell you, unfortunately, if there was something that triggered in me, it just felt wrong, right? And sometimes that's what you have to go with. Something doesn't feel right, and so I need to speak up. And at that time, I had about 8,000 followers, I think, which is, no small number. It's not the obscene number that I have now, but what I like to think that I have curated an engaged following both then and now. And so once we started, so I can't tell you what the trigger is, but then once we started having those conversations, it became very, very interesting to continue having those discussions about the difference between diversity and equity and inclusion, because they're not synonymous, and what things should look like, and the fact that once you have the phrase Oscar winner after your name, it doesn't carry as much weight as one would think, especially if you're a Black woman. We don't have to get into all the minutia there, but as I was able to pull the curtain back a little bit and really get into my research and start talking to people, and then eventually, meeting people in the entertainment industry and having those more in-depth conversations, it made me realize, one, the Oscars aren't any different than any other awards organization, and they all have their problems. And two, perhaps we as entertainment consumers put too much stock into them when determining what we should and should not see. And three, that it's not just the award shows, that we have to start with respect to Hollywood and who the gatekeepers are, who green lights those films, who keeps, giving us, slavery porn every single year. And that's sort of the only thing it feels like that Oscar voters will, be drawn to, that kind of thing. So, all of those questions and issues are things that I had to learn over the years. And so there wasn't really I don't know that there was a thing that particular January morning that, clicked on for me and said, hey, you need to, this correlates with everything that you've been talking about all this time. It really was just very natural.
Yeah, no,
I see my mother has put a question in the chat, so I don't know what the question is yet. But.
Oh yeah. I'll get to the questions in a moment. And if you're listening and watching, this is Becoming Less Racist, Lighting the Path to Anti-Racism. We're with April Rain, the creator of the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite, and she does a lot of work in the space of media and representation and race. And that's what we're getting into right now. So this is where I'm most excited about our conversation, April. What you're describing as your experience, it really resonates for me because in previous episodes, we've talked to folks who have explained how normalization works, and normativity, that you're so used to whiteness that you don't even notice that it's the norm until someone points it out. And so for me, growing up in the States, I'd never really thought about representation in the way that we're talking about it now. And once people started having that discussion and I started tuning in, I was like, oh yeah, of course, like that's my experience too. But kind of like you're describing, I wouldn't have been able to put my finger on it before. I guess what I'd like to hear from you a little bit more on is around this idea of representation, right? There's a lot of conversation and there's there's now, I mean, I guess you could even say it's an overused cliche that representation matters. So talk to us a little bit about that idea. What is the value of representation, not just on the award shows, but also in media generally?
Eh, Everyone, regardless of who they love or who they pray to or what they look like or where their family is from, um, or how they move in the world, deserves to see themselves represented on screen, deserves to have a story like theirs told. And so that's why representation matters, not just in the entertainment industry, but, there are pieces of it, art imitating life and life imitating art. So the fact that we have something like Doc McStuffins, the little Black girl who pretends to be a doctor, or I guess who is a doctor, that's important for little girls of color to see, oh, I can do that. I can become a doctor. It's also important for little boys to know that, yes, there can be female doctors in the world. All doctors don't have to be men, because that was an issue for a while as well, way back in the day. It's important that we have, you know, representation also helps us understand communities that are not ours. So, having Pose on TV opened up a lot of eyes to the trans community, right? And it's, to me, it's all about normalizing inclusion. You don't need to think about the fact that she is trans. She's just trans, right? And she loves the color yellow, and and she eats pickles, but only on Saturdays. Like, everything, should have its place in the world. And we shouldn't pigeonhole people or try to label them because they belong to one community or another. That's just an innate part of who they are. And so, talking about representation in the corporate world, what does it mean to attempt to, ascend within your particular company or organization, but never have a mentor, who identifies similarly to the way that you do, who can help you, scale that ladder of success. So if you're a Latina and there aren't any Latinas in your company in the C-suite, who do you rely on? Who do you ask questions of to say, how do I get to where you got? I'm dealing with, microaggressions, how do I work with that? So it matters everywhere. The fact that we have Afro-Latinos in baseball, that can be some little boy's dream, right? The fact that we now have a woman coach in the NBA, right? Not the WNBA, but the NBA. All of those things matter. It's unfortunate that we are here in 2020 and we're still talking about firsts in so many categories. And so the goal is to not talk about firsts, because we have normalized inclusion, so that people from different marginalized communities, people from traditionally underrepresented communities, are sitting shoulder to shoulder post-COVID, shoulder to shoulder with us, and we don't even think about it anymore, because it just is.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it reminds me of this really painful conversation I had with my nephew a few years back, who is an incredible golfer. Young, he wasn't even a teenager yet, but really good at golf. And I asked him if he wanted to be a professional golfer when he grew up, and he said, "No, I can't." I was like, "Oh, why not?" And he said, "Well, I wear a turban." And on the one hand, I'm laughing in my head because I'm like, what does a turban have to do with golf? But on the other hand, it's heartbreaking because it shows you the impact it has on your psychology just to live in a world where you don't see people like you who are on the stages where you would like to be, or where what you
Exactly.
aspire to accomplish.
Exactly. Regardless of what industry or chosen profession or occupation you wish to do, it's crucial that there is someone there who can not only help guide your path, but who's also already blazed that trail. And so for some of us in some categories, we have to be the people that blaze that trail, And it's vitally important that we lift as we climb, that we keep that, we break that door down and then we put something really heavy at the bottom to ensure that it stays open so that other people can follow along behind us.
Right. No, I think that's a really interesting observation. I mean, in my own experience, there's within the sick world a lot of doors that need to be broken open, but the politics of the first, right, to break through. What does it look like to keep that door open for your community? Maybe it's not even keeping the door open; it's like helping to create a ladder to help, so people can get up, right? Like maybe that's part of the imagery, and part of the politics of how you really engage and build community power and representation. I'm seeing a question here from Carol, and just before I get there, I have one more question for you. And this is a question I'd love to hear from you. I know you have experience in the media world, and also in the corporate world. So I guess it's a broad question around the difference between representation and tokenization. Yeah. So there's this impulse. I think everyone now, anyone you talk to will say, yes, diversity is important and representation is important. But there's also this feeling so many times, and it's a frustrating one, where where it feels like people are doing something superficial. They don't actually care about changing culture. They just want it to seem like they care, and check a box or create this sort of performance of doing what they're supposed to do. And so can you talk to us a little bit about the difference between those two? How do you think about that, and how do we guard ourselves from falling into that trap?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of that now, with the Black Lives Matter protests throughout the country and in fact around the world. Organizations and corporations and networks and studios and everyone else are falling all over each other to attempt to say, we're not racist, and maybe not even getting to, we're anti-racist, but, Black Lives Matter here too. And I think for me, the easiest way to differentiate between representation and tokenism is agency. So yes, you've got a Black person in your, fashion clothing ad. I'm trying not to say a specific brand name, but do you have any Black people in the company? Or who is on that ad agency? Did you hire a Black-owned ad agency to actually get that ad into the market? So I think agency and authenticity, and part of authenticity is putting some money behind it. So for example, if I had to shout out a company that I think does it well, it would be Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's has been down with Black Lives Matter for decades. You visit their place, I think it's in Vermont, their corporate headquarters, and they've got Black Lives Matter flags there. And they weren't just ordered, they've been there, flying full staff for years and years and years. And they have put money into Black lives, causes that support Black lives. And so, there have been a lot of Johnny come latelys, especially in the last 30 to 60 days. And so you have to ask the question, do the people that you are hiring now, because the big thing is to hire, a diversity and inclusion specialist or director or something, to say that you did something, but what kind of agency does that person have? You've hired them, but have you changed the hiring process to ensure that you are casting the widest net and getting, the most talented person to work for your organization? Yes, Black Lives Matters to a particular movie studio, and you want to have representation, and so you're putting out a film that reflects one aspect of the Black experience. I don't like to say Black films or Latinx films or what have you, but so your film represents one aspect of the Black experience, but are you supporting that film with your marketing dollars? Right. So very famously back in 2014, when Selma, Ava DuVernay's film was released, here's this huge film about, the march and Martin Luther King and John Lewis, both rest in peace. And yet when it came time for awards consideration, the studio did not send out the screeners. So, the Oscar members are able to get the films delivered to their home. So they don't actually have to sit in, movie theaters with, us common folk to see the films. But the studio didn't send out the screeners. Well, you know, if you're an A-list actor or director and you don't have the convenience, you know, to watch the film in your home, you may not see it. And if you don't see it, you may not vote for it. And so, you know, that's the difference between tokenism. You know, I'm going to put a black face on this ad. I'm going to say I'm doing this, you know, quote unquote black project, but I'm, you know, I'm gonna, you know, not put full steam into it. You know, and this is coming from a lower level employees or management, but you know, when you get to the C-suite, you don't have full buy-in on issues of anti-racism. That's tokenism. You know, actual representation is making sure that the people that you do put in place have agency to bring on more who look like them and from other marginalized communities, and that they are given the resources, both financial and otherwise, to actually make the structural changes that need to happen.
Yeah, thank you. That's super powerful and clarifying. And if I can ask you to bring it back to Hollywood for a moment, is that a change we're starting to see now? Are now that the curtains have been pulled open, right? And they've been. It's not just that Hollywood's been exposed. It's also that many of us who weren't noticing before have been awakened to this problem, right? And partially because of your work, right? Like that's been, I think, really important for many of us. Are we seeing change, or is there? One of the things you mentioned at the outset of our conversation is the importance of gatekeepers, right? So yes, we may be seeing more actors and actresses, and you know, prominent roles, you know, folks of color. But are we seeing structural change from the top down, or not so much?
I don't think so. You know, the gatekeepers for like all of the major studios are older white men, and that hasn't changed. And they decide what films get greenlit. And, you know, they choose the films that resonate with them. And that's not prejudice or bigotry or whatever. It's like, you know, well, make more of what I like to see.
Right, of course.
Stereotypically, what do white men like to see? They love a good war film, which is why, you know, at the beginning of every award season, you can clock it, you know, you can set your watch by it, you know, October, November, December, you're always getting, you know, I think last year was 1917, you know, you can go back to Platoon and, you know, Apocalypse Now. There's always a war film every year because that's what older white men love to see. Right? They love to blow stuff up and, you know, that pathos and all of that, right? So what I do think we are seeing, however, is that actors and actresses and others from marginalized communities, you know, we're talking predominantly race here, are no longer waiting for a seat at the table. They are building their own mansion and putting their table in it. So obviously Ava DuVernay is one of the most famous ones, but other folks like Michael B. Jordan and Viola Davis and her husband Julius Tenen, Will and Jada Pinkett Smith and John Boyega are creating their own production companies. And that's where they can say, you know, these are the works that we want to see. These are the projects, you know, where we have people of color, people from marginalized communities, both in front of and behind the camera. Because for me, it's crucially important, not just whose story is being told, but who is telling that story, you know, because if you don't have the context to tell a story about a particular marginalized group or a particular person from a marginalized community, you're going to get it wrong. You know, see, for example, Green Book. You know, and there are many, many examples of that. So I think the incremental, slow but steady progress we're seeing is being led by people who are outside of the big Hollywood bubble. In that sense, I think that the rise of digital content, you know, because we're all, you know, sheltering at home, is also creating a change because it's a lot cheaper to put something on a streaming service than it is to put it on a huge, you know, theater in screen in IMAX or whatever the case may be. And so that provides more opportunities for traditionally underrepresented communities because it costs less money, and it's easier to reach someone at Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime or whatever than it is to reach somebody at Universal or 20th Century or Paramount. So I think those are the changes, you know, as in all things, when we're talking about systemic change, it almost always happens from the ground up. And then there's a groundswell, and then people, sitting in those ivory towers realize, oh, well, we better get on this bandwagon, because at this point, studios, diversity sells. Bottom line, when we're talking about entertainment, but also in every single industry. The more diverse something is, the better it does, whether we're talking bottom line or box office receipts or whatever the case may be. And so especially in the entertainment industry, studios and networks who are not actively thinking about being not just more diverse, but more inclusive, are literally leaving money on the table at this point. One quick example is the Fast and Furious franchise, right? They make $1 bazillion. We're on like Fast and Furious 42 or something. I think the next one they're going to Mars. I don't know. And it's always the same premise, right? It's a, let's go blow up $1 bazillion cars. But it has one of the most diverse casts definitely of any franchise that I can think of. So you've got Vin Diesel, who's a man of color. You've got Tyrese when he's not messing up. You've got women in, real significant lead roles. You have The Rock, who is a man of color. But nobody thinks about that as a diversity film, right? It's just a film that everybody loves with, with guys and gals blowing stuff up and driving fast cars. And so that's an easy example to say, oh, well, this won't sell well overseas, or nobody will come see this. Look at Fast and Furious, right? And if that is, if that should be the metric, right? If we can have people from different communities and everybody will still come see that film, then why not make a quieter film, a smaller film, but include, again, people from traditionally underrepresented communities, so that, as we talked about before, everybody has the opportunity to see themselves on screen.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you make a strong case for why diversity, right? And the simple case that diversity sells, right? It sells films. And at the same time, what I'm hearing you say is, if there's not structural change within the industry, you won't have authentic storytelling within the diverse representation, because you'll have diversity, but you won't have inclusion. You will have the same folks telling stories of communities they don't know and people they don't know, and messing it up, right? And so the danger, I think, of the danger you're describing is one of diversity being commodified, as opposed to being authentically engaged, right? And that to me is the opposite of anti-racism. You're at the end of the day, you're just using people, right, to make more money. And this is part of what we talk about when we talk about appropriation. So anyway, I'm totally with you. It's really interesting. I'm loving the conversation, and I want to go to a question from Carol. She's asking, what's been the most gratifying thing for you through your journey so far?
Hi, Mom. The most gratifying thing, I think, is that I feel like I've made, I don't like to take credit, because I stand on the shoulders of Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee and Harry Belafonte and so many entertainers who have been screaming about diversity and equity and inclusion for decades, even before I was born, using words that, before diversity, equity, inclusion, those phrases and words existed. But I feel like we're at a turning point now where my kids will have more opportunities to see themselves accurately and authentically represented on both the big and the small screen, due to conversations that have emanated from Oscar So White and people saying, yes, we have to somehow take a chance, as if it's risky to take a chance on people of color, but we're going to go in a new direction, which provides more opportunities for people of color in front of and behind the camera. And this is focused on race, but I just want to make clear that Oscar So White is about all marginalized communities, so not just race, but also gender and sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, and age. We can have, the scruffy James Bond, but God forbid Viola Davis wants to play an action hero. It's weird. But so I think that's what's most gratifying, that it feels like, my kids are going to have it a little easier than I did, even for something like entertainment. And I think, for most folks, especially those who are parents, that's the goal, to make things a little bit easier for the folks coming behind you.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll say it's probably easier for me to give you credit than for you to take it. But I'll say, you really have made a huge difference in this conversation. And so to speak to that being a gratifying thing for you to see this change and being a part of it, it's not unwarranted for sure. Your comment about kids, it reminds me of this moment I had with my 4-year-old day before yesterday. I was recording a video for my new children's book. And I was just getting ready actually. And so I was tying my turban and she was just talking to me about why I was getting ready because she was interested. And I asked her, I'm doing this book reading, and I talked about the book and she likes the book. And I asked her, how does it make you feel to have a book with a character with a turban on it? And she didn't really say anything. And then I asked her again, and then I started prompting her because she's 4, maybe she doesn't know how to articulate her feelings. And I was like, does it make you happy? Does it make you sad? Does it make you excited? Does it make you angry? And she was like, you know what, Dad, I don't think it makes me feel anything. And so I asked her, I was not expecting that response. I said, why doesn't it make you feel anything? And she said, well, I have so many books that on my shelf with people with turbans. It's just, I like all those books, but it doesn't make me feel anyway. And to me, it was kind of this unexpected moment of what that normalization looks like. We've been very intentional about curating a bookshelf where we have these diverse representations of all communities, but especially our own. But I guess that's what normal looks like. And when you're talking about creating this difference for your kids, when they're seeing films with, Black protagonists and not thinking twice about it being some special moment, I had that conversation with my daughter, and it totally threw me off because I wanted her to be more excited about my book, I guess.
Yeah, you're just one of many now, right? She doesn't really care about your book because she's got 7 others that look just like it. But that's the thing, that's normalizing inclusion. I think about the importance of having Coco, as a film for little Latinx kids, because when have we ever seen a little Latino or Latina as the star of the show in a film that way, especially a young person? The Emmys the Emmy nominations just came out. And, although we can celebrate the nominations for Black folks, there were no Latino or Latino actors or actresses nominated yesterday.
Wow.
None. There were, Pose received several nominations, and yet none of the actresses, the trans actresses, were nominated. The only person nominated was a cis man. So that Rami was nominated, and he is the first Muslim American show in 2020 to ever be nominated in that category. So we still have a lot of work to do, but it's great that the train is slowly moving forward.
Right. Yeah, totally. And before you go, I want us to you to tell us what's next for you. What do you have cooking? I know you're working with Ensemble to get it off the ground. What does that look like, and how does it fit into your politics?
So there are 2 things that I'm working on. The first is Ensemble, which is a digital content studio focused on producing and distributing work by and for and about people of color and people from marginalized communities. So this is the same thing we were talking about earlier, making the content that you want to see. And so, we're hoping to provide the resources to make it easier for creatives and artists to do just that. And so that is just kicked off. The other thing that I'm working on, which is news to you, so you started with a surprise and I'm ending with one, is a campaign called She Will Rise. And we will be discussing the need for a Black female Supreme Court justice, Democratic presidential nominee Biden has committed to nominating a Black woman to the Supreme Court. And so the campaign will be dropping shortly so that we can build a grassroots movement to support that idea and, in fact, to ask why it hasn't happened so far.
It's awesome. Oh, that sounds amazing. Oh yeah, that's a great surprise to end on. So thank you. Thanks for the surprise, and thanks for all the time. I know it's a busy season for you, and again, I just want to, from the bottom of my heart, I feel like you've had such an impact on my own understanding and knowledge of what racism looks like in our society and what we can do about it. So thank you for everything you've done, April.
Thank you so much for that. This was lovely. I enjoy talking to you in person, you know, when the pandemic lifts again, and online and here as well. So I thank you for providing this forum and this space for people to talk honestly about issues of race and anti-racism.
Of course, no, it's my pleasure. And for all of you who have joined today, I'm grateful to you as well. I love being on this journey together to become less racist. This is the last episode of our first season. So just a real sincere thank you to all of you. Keep moving towards anti-racism. I'll do so as well. And we'll see you in the next season of Becoming Less Racist, lighting the path towards anti-racism. Thank you all, and take care. Bye.